I guess I have to unmute this mic. Hey there, good morning. Welcome to the Dev Talk Show on April 14th, 2025. I'm here with my co-host Rich Ross. How you doing this morning, Rich?
Good, Chris. How you doing? We both seem to be having some audio challenges, so it's
Yeah,
it's
there
a
were
Monday.
different technical difficulties all getting ready this morning. So off to a little bit of a late start. So let's get moving.
Yeah, but
Um,
not as late as some people. When you have
yeah,
folks who are watching from other time zones, welcome, Alan.
yeah.
Good to see you.
Thank you for being here. Great to
Yeah.
see you. Still, it's the middle of April here in the Northeast of the United States. Um, and I keep waiting for it to warm up a little bit. But this morning, it's not frigid cold,
Mm-mm.
but I'm still wearing sweaters. So
I,
I feel like any day now, any day now. But
I don't.
hopefully we get a decent spring and it doesn't just immediately decide to be hot and humid, right?
Oh, absolutely. That'd be the worst. But I certainly don't mind hanging on to my hoodie in the morning here. So it's to me that's a comfortable way to get up and get started. So
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody
cool.
who's joining us, whether you're joining us live or watching in the future on YouTube. And if you're watching in the future, let us know when it starts to warm up a little bit. Um, in any case, today we have been working on setting up a development. I guess I don't want to call it a development environment, but our project for the the .NET user group. At least that's what we think we'll use it for. And one of the things that we're doing is, let's see, some of the goals here is use .NET Aspire, and we're also going to put the data in Cosmos DB. And I think where we left off last time, we were getting the Aspire functionality working, and then we're trying now. I think today we'll try and see about connecting to a Cosmos DB instance. Is that what we're doing? It's
I
not
think
the
that's what we had.
emulator, right? Okay.
Well, we have the emulator locally, so we can certainly. I
Okay.
think that would be the first thing to try is to make sure
Yeah.
that
Okay.
see if we can get that to work because it's all there.
Right.
Um, and where I think we want to go is, well, two things. Since we're always thinking about latest and greatest, .NET Aspire 9.2
Yep.
came out last week, so maybe we do a quick update of that, which is really just as easy as changing the reference and then doing a restore. So we can do that quick. Next from that is to see if we can get our basically creating an API layer to be able to very easily create a record in our Cosmo environment. I think those are the couple things that are like short term topics that are that we can kind of get to. I think kind of easily. So
Okay.
yeah. So let's maybe dive into that. So I probably should share my screen.
Well, like you mentioned, let's see, you mentioned .NET Aspire 9.2, and that's important because it did release last week.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about Aspire is that at least today, the support is only on the latest version.
Oh,
Right.
okay. So unlike
unlike the regular .NET lifecycle that
mm-hmm.
we're kind of used to, is and I think that might be posted somewhere. Let me see. Yeah, here we have a .NET Aspire support policy, which, what are they saying here? So that this page hasn't been updated quite yet, but it says it's got .NET Aspire 9.1 shown. And then it says, at any time, only the latest release of .NET Aspire is supported by Microsoft. For example, support for .NET Aspire 8 ends when Aspire 8.1 is released. So
Okay.
that's okay because we're updating anyway.
Yeah.
And look, I think for people who may be looking at this and saying like, boy, that doesn't sound like, it's not as flexible as even the .NET policy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because, and I think I've seen folks on the team say this, is that they're moving very quickly with Aspire, and they recognize they're still at a move fast, break things stage where there's customer feedback, scenarios are brought to the front of trying to do X, trying to do Y. So I'm certainly not speaking for that team at Microsoft, but I don't think the plan is for it to be this way forever.
Yeah, I agree. Although I'm not in those meetings, so can't really be sure all those things. So always throw the caveat in there. So I'm just doing basically going here. Our app host is where I'm just starting with, and then we'll get the rest of the packages as we come off of those. So let's try this. Let's do and install the latest. So nope, it's fine. Apply. Accept. All right. So in that first one, well, let's see. All right. Did I miss something? Because it still says 9.1. Although those are gone. Let's see. Boom. Mm-hmm. Okay, that seems to be taken care of. There's the other one, the extensions discovery. So that's this project. We'll do that. Yep. Awesome. And then these. Select them all. Those are all on the web page. So I'll do that. Yep, that's fine. Mm-hmm. All right, one more. That's it. All right. That should take care of all of them. Now we go here. Oops. This is changed. Let me just close that. Solution.
Yeah, I might have looked away. Did you change the CS Proj file yourself?
Or was that okay? I left it.
That makes sense. That the NuGet package, the NuGet manager would update that reference. That makes sense.
Yeah, it didn't get this one though.
Yeah, I wonder if it doesn't know about that.
Well, let's find out real quick.
Because the NuGet package manager should deal with that.
And maybe it's
I'm sorry, not with that, with the package references.
Yeah.
But it may not know about, because I don't think it manages it.
It's interesting because it says that we're 9. It says we're 9.2.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's just the package references, because I'm pretty sure that the NuGet package manager only deals with that section of the CS Proj. I'm guessing it doesn't know about.
Which is why I left this the way it was. So if I do that. Okay. I think it looks good. Everything seemed to run.
Yeah.
Oh. Did that do that again? So I've seen that happen before. Let me see. Boom. Yeah, where I lost the app host being.
Oh, it wasn't the startup project? Okay.
No, that's, yeah. Okay. So let's leave that where that is. Let's try that once more.
All right, so the dashboard came up, the website comes up.
Yep.
Then it takes a second for it to figure out, usually about okay. And this is trying to run to the emulator, right?
Yeah. Unhealthy. Why unhealthy? Let's see. Data Explorer. Running with a lifetime.
So that's setting up the emulator there, saying that the
Yeah.
Data Explorer is going to be available. And the Data Explorer is just like a little website that it hosts, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's not like so it's not thinking the endpoint was the issue. Let's do this. Okay, we got two of them. No, let's stop that one. Let's get rid of that one. Yep, delete forever is fine. And let's go with this one that we were just trying to start. Maybe they were running on the same channels or whatever. Let's see.
Now, do you have to start that separately, or?
Shouldn't have to. I think part of it was it's still unhealthy. I might give it a second. Message file a directory, release version. All right, we've got no data in it. It's going to get created when we'll figure the persistence out when we get there. Let's just go ahead and kill that. Delete it. Yep. Explorer is not working right now. Oh, it's probably the data. Probably. Unless something changed in the go away, don't need that. Unless something changed with the app data volume.
I guess I don't remember what that was.
So when we finished up last time with Cosmo, what we did was we created a preview emulator, which is what we've instantiated here. And inside of that preview emulator, we said, go ahead and put up a data explorer. So we have a local way of looking into the data. And then when we ran through it a couple times, we added database and container, but it didn't persist when we restarted because the container got redone. So what we're saying is you got to put in a data volume so you have a place to store that data,
right?
And then have a persistence lifetime for that data to live against. So what if I just give it another?
Yeah, I remember that now. Is that first we started it without either of those parameters, right? And then basically every time you started the app, it was kind of like starting over. So what was the change exactly?
So I did here's what
Oh, you created a new data volume.
I think that was what it was hiccuping on, because for whatever reason it was trying to find the old one and couldn't, or saw the old one and it didn't make sense. It was colliding with something. And I think what happened was I was doing some testing and I basically said, well, let me go create another Cosmo instance in this other Aspire project. And I kind of grabbed it and I didn't change the data volume. So they're both probably pointing to the same data volume. That's near as I can kind of piece together over the things I was trying to put together over the weekend. So,
Okay.
I mean, the good thing now is that if we go to here, sorry, not that one, this one. Yep. And open Data Explorer. We now have a place where Data Explorer lives. We also have a connection string. If I look at Data Explorer, there's probably not going to be anything here, and there isn't, right? We don't have anything created. But we could seed some of those things out and do that as part of Aspire.
Okay.
Essentially in our code. So we could say, if we come down here and we say, let's do and so we're going to create a database object. We're going to say take the Cosmos DB, which is the reference to, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here as well. Is that better?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Okay. There we go. Give me a little more room to work with. Okay. What we can say then is cosmos.add a database. And it's interesting there. There are, I say add. So interesting to note, and this is probably some 9.1 to 9.2 stuff. If I do this, is it going to work? There we go. That's terrible. I know why. Let's do this. Let's stop this for right now. Okay. If I do add, I get a couple of things here. I get add database that gets offered to me by default. The problem is that if you hover over this one, just brought it up. Come on. We're not running. All right, let's just do that because this should now give it to me because I got the green squiggle. All right. The important thing here is that this one is deprecated.
Okay.
I'm not sure why. I'm not sure which version it's associated with, but basically it's an obsolete one. And we now should be using this here, which is add Cosmos database to add a Cosmos database to your instance. Okay. So let's do the same thing. Cool. So there's that. So now that we have a database, which we'll call Orbital, because I think that's what we did when we were running through it, I could then go ahead and also create a container and say, take the database and add container. Cool. That looks like the right one. And we've got to add some additional things inside of there. So this is, we're going to have one container. So if Orbital's the database, the container should be, because it's going to have both meetings and
speakers,
attendee or makers, attendees, whatever it is we want to call them, right?
Yeah, right.
So is it just Orbital? Well, I mean, we could be silly and say Orbital container, or just because that's kind of what it's offering up here. we could suppose
if you were in the portal, although is this what it's going to be named in the portal, basically? The actual resource?
technically, so it could be. Because
Okay.
if you think about what Aspire is going to do, Aspire is going to take what we've got here in app host, which becomes a representation of what our architecture is and the things we're going to need in Azure for this to run, and create the bicep files and use, if we run them through CI/CD or we see AZD up, it'll go ahead and create those things in Azure. So we could rename the bicep files or inject something at runtime of the bicep files if this is running through CI/CD. So it's not something we've got to get, married to, but it is, it could be what becomes the persistent name. So if we just say, and then here we want a partition key path. So in our JSON document, or a JSON definition that is our schema for these items, these document items in Cosmos. So sorry, maybe take a step back. CosmoDB is a NoSQL data store. So we're going to store everything here as JSON objects or JSON documents. That JSON document is going to have some structure to it, and we can talk about that in a minute. But in order for it to understand how it should partition out our data, it wants to know what field should we use for partitioning. And partitioning is important because a partition would be how, if it needs to figuring about how to spread out the storage or what items to kind of keep together, that partition property is important. So let's say we kept it very generic and we said, hey, just make the ID the partition key. And that means every object in there, it has an ID. So they're all going to be unique. So you're basically going to have a partitioning item where the partition is one. It's that one object, whatever has that ID.
Okay.
And that certainly can work, but as you start to think about partitioning and querying across partitions, that can become problematic because how it might partition means if it needs to move it for storage reasons to another location, it uses that as the key. So grouping like partition things together and separating those that are different when it needs to. There's probably about a good half dozen pages of documentation in our documents that talk through partitions and thinking about partitions and what's the right way to do partitions. And I'm trying to condense all of that down into a little bit of some theory here. But the idea is that you could be very basic and say /ID, and that would certainly work. I think what we want to do is something a little different in that if we think about how we might, the data that we have here, we're storing two main things that we've talked about. The meetings themselves, and then the members or the attendees or the people who belong to the group. Okay. Each one of those is going to have a different schema, but it should be consistent across all of those items or that type of data. If I'm going to query across those, and I say, well, give me all of the meetings for this month or give me all the meetings going forward, I'm probably going to be asking a query like that than saying, give me all the meetings where this person attended, because we're going to be storing that information in the meeting structure anyway, right? We know who the attendees are for each individual meeting. And vice versa, each attendee is going to have inside of their schema all the meetings that they have said they were going to attend, and we can tag whether they attended or not. So because of that, I'm thinking that partition might make sense to be just the type of schema that we're using. So having all of the meetings be in one partition and have all of the member schemas be in another partition, because it's not very likely that we're going to go across, do a search that goes across those two partitions.
Okay.
So if we do
Now, I mean, like you said,
go ahead.
as you're typing this in, because I don't want to hold it up, is
Mhm.
when you're choosing a key, um, you're trying to come up with something so that is this. I just want to make sure I'm saying this right. You're trying to come up with something so that Cosmos DB has a way to distribute, these documents more in like a uniform fashion based on that key,
Mhm.
because you don't
Exactly.
provide that distribution, right? Like let's say you create a container and you only put in, and I don't know if this is true, and if you don't know, that's okay either, and you only put in like 2 documents, then Cosmos might be like, well, whatever. I mean, yeah, one of them the key is B and the other one is Z, but there's only 2 of them. I don't have to scale yet. But then
Right.
later you put in 500,000 of them, and the keys are uniformly pretty uniformly. It's almost just as likely that you'd have an A as a B as a C as a Z, and they're all just letters of the alphabet. Then
Mhm.
that means you've done a good job, and Cosmos can distribute that, because it says like, hey,
Yes.
let me take the E, F, and G's and I'll keep those together, and I'll take the H through M's and keep those together.
And so yes, and so looking at it from Cosmos perspective, yes. So now it can basically split those things off. You can also have hierarchical keys where maybe it
Okay.
is, hey, we do by members, but we also have some other way of classifying them. Maybe it's location, maybe it's some other kind of parameter in there so that they could be hierarchically aligned, where it's the
Yeah.
member type and their city, let's say, right? So some way of
Yeah.
grouping them. But what's interesting though is when think about how Cosmos separates it, we also have to think about how we might want to ask for that information
Yeah.
back,
Right.
because
Right.
that makes it more complex if it's split across partitions
Yeah.
for Cosmos to retrieve it.
Yeah, so I can see different scenarios, and you just have to decide what it is you're doing, or are you willing, I suppose, in some cases, to just sort of eat that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a user group app that generally has one meeting, one event, whatever they're called, and you generally search, like you're just bringing up a calendar of events, then is the key, your what you want for read efficiency there is I don't know that you necessarily want to group them by date, but you want to query and get like the last 5 or something. It's something you're doing a lot.
Right.
But that's different, I would say, than managing a conference where these events are sessions. And if you just dump them all in there and the
Mm-hmm.
sessions are maybe distributed by the name of the session or something, well, the problem with that is that when you run this particular conference, you might have to hop across all the different partitions to bring together the ones for that weekend,
Right.
because you didn't group it by conference. You grouped them by maybe name. So I think it's interesting, because I know I talked with you a little bit about this offline. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it was live. I could be wrong though. And it was just about like, hey, should the key for the events be based on date? And I think you had said like, well, I don't know, because then maybe we'll create a lot of different partitions. I don't remember what the answer was there.
Yeah. Well, you would only have one item for a date, just like if you had an ID. If you did it by
Yeah,
ID, you
I
only have one
gotcha.
item for the ID. So it's a little more
It's
fine
weird
grained
because
than that.
I don't even know if I'd want it to be by year, because the year rolls like years go January to December, but the dates roll like along a tape measure. So when you're in different parts of the year, the last 12 months are rolling circularly. When
Mm-hmm.
you're in June, the last 12 months go from June to June, but when you're in January, so saying, well, let's partition them 2023, 2024, 2025, well, that only helps you certain times of the year.
Yeah. And then you're going to be a cross partition when you're trying to get that 12-month window, right?
Right. Now, are we fretting too much about being across a couple partitions? That's what I'm wondering. Um, so has
Our
this
data
come
is not
back
that
to,
large.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
I mean,
I get, then you could make the argument is that like we're trying to use Cosmos to demonstrate it. And I suppose
mhm,
if we take it to that logical extreme, it's like, well, you didn't need to use Cosmos, right?
right.
So, but when you're trying to learn something, you're not necessarily going to say, okay, let's learn it by throwing a trillion document database at it.
Yeah. I mean, the hope is this takes off and you have that many records to worry about. But in the, for the most part, what we're talking about here is, even if we did 10 years of meetings going into the future, right? What's that? 120 records?
Yeah. Right. No, I know. I understand.
So yeah, no, but I mean, this is some of the thought process you need to kind of go through. And I don't know if that's saved or not, because what I did was,
well, it looks like kind of like you're still getting Copilot there. Like that line of code. Oh no, there it goes.
Yeah. My ghost text. I'll have to see where it went, because I did ask, one of the GitHub Copilot models to, let's have a discussion about this around,
okay.
What should my structure be for the meetings and for the members, so that I limit the amount of cross partitioning queries that I might have to make. And it came up with that I think was an interesting structure. I know it's in one of the repositories there, but that's something we'll come back to and look at pretty shortly here, hopefully. So I've got type, which is what we're going to use. And then this here is container name. Name of the container, if not provided, this defaults to the same value as name. Okay. I don't know why. It's interesting. Interesting. So, I wonder. So I'm a little confused. And if we look at this here, there's an add container with the string of name. And that's the name of the container resource. So it's probably similar to, because this is Aspire, it's probably similar to like this name here, right? As opposed to actually specifying what it wants here, which is another name. But in this case, it's the name of the container that, if not provided, would go ahead back and use the one that you've already given up here.
Well, I think that's so, and maybe I'm wrong, but the first name with the parameter name, you're giving it what I can only call the Aspire name, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was guessing.
Yeah, that's the whole point of Aspire, is that instead of you having, one of the things that they're trying to solve for is that instead of you, which, look, I'll tell you right now, in projects that I work on today, you pull it down from source control and then you immediately drop into app settings and start changing values, because you need it to be pointing to your local host and your local whatever port. And depending on which IDE you used or which editor, we know that if you're super comfortable with Visual Studio, that every time you start a Visual Studio project, it assigns a port for your websites or your APIs for that project.
Yeah.
But yet, if you tend to spend most of your life in Visual Studio Code's, and I don't want to say it's Visual Studio Code, I think it's just the project setup. Let me be fair that it's not necessarily the tooling. Is the settings that they create there by default say, well, we're just going to start with 5,000, and if you come in and change it, that's on you, the developer. Like, we're not going to take it over as the IDE. So then you're like living in these two different worlds, where what if some developers on your team use code and some developers on your team use Visual Studio? And so that's what we're trying to solve here, is say, don't worry about it. Just by calling these things by a name, which I don't know what to call that name. I don't know. I don't want to call it the Aspire name, but there's certainly the resource.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go back to here, and that's what it says, the name of the container resource. And I'm sure if I go here, name of the database resource, and it does the same thing, it would let me go ahead at the end of this and specify something different if I wanted to.
So you're able to change the
So I think what you're getting to is this. There's a term here, and then there's another term here. And if you don't specify the second one, it'll use whatever you told Aspire to call it.
Yep.
So to be overly explicit, we could do that. Because I think
Okay.
Orbital is a good name for the database. Okay, so now we've
All right.
got that. What we don't have is anything for what's the word? Anything for the data that talks to the database yet. And what I should have done before we've gone down this path too far is do a git switch. See, call this our API layer. Whoops. See, I can't even spell git. There we go. All right. So now we have a different
So git
branch,
switch
essentially.
-c is saying create a new branch.
Yes.
Okay. Now it's funny that you might wonder why I'm asking that. And it's because I'm an old school Git guy that probably I'll tell you right now, I'm gonna my muscle memory is gonna say git checkout -b. That's just it's going to be very hard. Not that I like git switch, I really do.
Yeah.
I think git switch and git restore were two good commands to add because they essentially they're not aliases. To say that they're aliases is totally incorrect, but they sort of take what checkout was and make it a little bit more understandable for humans. Because checkout if you're a human being, checkout seems to do all kinds of stuff. If you're an engineer in Git, the elegance of it, you look at it and say like, no, Git checkout checks out. Like, what's the problem? But the view of a Git developer, somebody working on Git, somebody who really understands like the elegance of it, sees their view of what checkout is different from what we are as people. Mm-hmm. So I think adding the switch command was the right thing. It's just that the muscle memory is so old that I think I'm just always going to, I don't know, maybe I'll get to it, but I thought it was interesting there because I didn't know what -c was. And now I know it's a new branch, or at least I'd forgotten. So
that's okay.
It's -- create, yes. Basically.
Yeah. I think that would probably be an analogous way of thinking about it. So we have, our various branches, and we've got the one that we're pointing to here. Yep. It is interesting because I thought at one point there was a push to say stop using checkout and use switch. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And no, look, the smart people who are teaching others are saying just learn switch and restore. I'm not questioning that.
I am, because I'll be honest, and we ran into it last time we did this here, where I had done a branch and gone down a path where I started saying, all right, how does this work? How does this work? How does this work? And I thought I would just go back to main, which was where I had originally started. And I did a switch back to main and nothing disappeared. And what I was really looking for probably was checkout, because what I had to do was to go through a bunch of, get clean and remove things. So,
yeah, I mean, you can do things though, like git switch. I'm looking at now because I admit that I'm not like git switch has a discard changes. Git switch has it says switching branches does not require a clean index and a working tree. The operation is aborted, however, if it leads to loss of local changes, unless you're told otherwise with discard changes or with merge. Now, it still says in the documentation here that the command is experimental and the behavior may change. But I agree with you about one thing is that it's the kind of thing, like when it came to checkout, I literally sat there and tried a lot of things for days and days and days to try and figure out how it worked. And in the end, I'm no master of the entire system. I just kind of know the 20% that I'm pretty good at. So,
and often
anyways,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we think here, we've got 3 projects. We've got app host, web, and service defaults, because we know we need those. Those are kind of the core bits for Aspire, but we're going to need a new one. And I think it makes sense to push it off into its own separate repository or separate project. So let's do that. New project. And this new project is, I'm thinking maybe we try a minimal API, or some kind of an API layer.
Yep.
I would like to explore the minimal API because I think that's something interesting. And I think for what we've got here, that might be enough. So what I'll offer to call this orbital.api.
Okay.
Enable open API support, because that would be something you need to go take a look at with all the changes that are now in place in .NET 9 when it comes to the open API spec. And then enlist the .NET Aspire orchestration. It
Now,
probably will tell
this
us.
is not going to be a minimal API
because of that.
you have, because the use controller is checked. Yep.
Cool.
It's interesting that that's checked by default. That. Yeah.
Yeah. Because minimal was one of the things you could do. You could do controllers or a minimal API. So,
yep.
So
and believe me, there are, I feel, a healthy debate to this day, which is fine.
Yeah. Which side of that debate are you on?
It's the side of, if you're in the middle of, if your application's mature, I'm certainly not in the most cases going to switch. Okay. There are things I like about minimal APIs, though. I'd say I lean a little bit that way. Mm-hmm. And the main reason, which is not even the best reason, but it's just like, it's okay, is that I think it eliminates some of the boilerplate that really was just there to make our object-oriented brains feel better, or at least what we were used to. If you come to ASP.NET, if you joined ASP.NET back at MVC, then you're used to creating controllers for endpoints, and and controllers are your endpoints. Controllers are kind of like your resource. I don't want to call it paths, but like your homes for different resources. You're creating that classic movie app, so you're going to have a movies controller and a something controller. And if you really, really got used to that, and you've spent the last 10, 15 years of your life that way, it's going to be hard to want to leave it. But then you have to start to learn some magic about what's done by convention this way and that way, and what do these attributes do. Now, I'm not going to say that's any different with minimal APIs, because there's definitely convention there as well.
Yeah.
But it sort of has this, like, one of the things that's happened with ASP.NET Core is, you look at the code that you've got on the screen right now. This is like orchestration as code, but it uses this design pattern of, like, a builder pattern is very common. And these patterns of, like, you can almost read like a book what you're setting up.
Right.
And that's what minimal APIs heads toward, where it just reads like a book. But then I understand people who say, oh, but then it gets really messy, and how do you organize it? And so then people come up with organization patterns where they maybe pack endpoints into extension methods. And then I think what really happens is people just give up and they go get a package like fast endpoints, which we have not explored on the show, but I think would be interesting to look at. So
yeah, that's a good point. I'm interested because I've tried them a little bit, but I haven't gone down the path where I really have enough experience around them to kind of come out one way or the other. And I think that's what I was trying to do here.
Like Alan says, there's no reason. I think he means to say can't. No reason you can't use both. Sure. Minimal's my preference, as I control the middleware.
Yeah.
It feels like the rest of what you're already doing in ASP.NET Core. I like them, but I will say that I don't know that I've had the opportunity to manage a large enough enterprise API with minimal APIs to say, okay, I'm starting to see the warts.
Mm-hmm.
I have more experience managing mature enterprise APIs that were built with controllers that, have many years, a lot of mileage on them. And I see the warts. Right. And so that's kind of where I'm personally at when I just,
Gotcha. Awesome. We've got a few minutes left. We're going to see how much of this we can get at least started to scaffold out and see where it goes. We may not get just with timing wise, we may not get to the connection of the data set there, but Um, let's see. Are you on Twitch?
Yeah. Yeah, I got it.
Thanks. What I'm going to say is let's go ahead and bring in an Aspire package so that we can do we can make the connection to Cosmos. So I think if I do this and then just say Cosmos, there we go. So because what I want is interesting. There are two. There is, and Aspire will work with both of them, I guess. We can talk to Cosmos with just through the Aspire configuration. So that would probably mean us setting up a client, Cosmos client object, and then using that to connect and do those things. The other thing is that might be possible is using Entity Framework to make that connection for us. Using the Cosmos DB provider for Entity Framework and doing those pieces. Chris, do you have a preference? Do we want to bring in the Entity Framework bits?
Not having seen them for Cosmos, I don't know.
Okay, same. I'm kind of leaning just, hey, let's go against the client object and do things that way for now.
Okay. I think it would be interesting because clearly where Entity Framework Core has gone the last several years is, I mean, it began life trying to be the ASP, well, to be the .NET Core version of Entity Framework, which has made sense. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that team, and again, I'm saying this without having experience with modern Entity Framework Core, is that team is trying to fulfill the original, I mean, you go way back, the original promise of Entity Framework to say, hey, we're an abstraction over object relational mapping of your data. So we don't care if you're using SQL Server or Postgres or Oracle. But you could see that Entity Framework and Entity Framework Core were always very relational heavy. So you had I don't want to call them drivers, but you had support for Oracle, support for SQL, maybe support for Postgres. And now you're starting to see, oh, we have Mongo support, we have Cosmos support. So there's something there that I haven't personally dug into.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I'm with you at this point. I think we're kind of pushing the edges on a lot. Maybe we come back around later on and wind up swapping that out. But I think for right now, this might be the way to go with it. All right. So it gave us our sample API inside of here. So we've got things like weather forecast. And is that the only? I think it's the only endpoint right now that's currently up and running. If we're in development, it's going to let us go ahead and bring in, I believe that is mapping out the Open API specification for us. And probably somewhere in here, we would also get a, that's interesting. Some kind of an engine to be able to look at the Open API pieces, essentially. So what I want to do is, at least for right now, let's not do anything with this. But if we said, hey, let's app.mat get API slash meetings. Oh, I hit the wrong one. Oops, sorry. We could certainly return something like that, right? To really quick run and see that we tested out. But we don't have, Interesting. That's not going to give us anything out of that Cosmo client. So let's take a look. Oh, I did want to bring this up when we were talking about Cosmo and figuring out indexes and policies and those kind of things. There's actually a certification. It's become that. I wouldn't say complex,
Yeah.
but there is that much knowledge around that service. So just be aware that that's a possibility. So,
And that's okay. That's in the certification section there. Okay.
mm-hmm. And I think, do I have?
Just because I was I didn't want to mix that up with applied. I think it's called applied skills, which is
Okay.
another section of Learn that I would tell people it's kind of like certifications light in that it's all 100% automated and at least for I mean it's 100% automated and open and free. Where basically you take some kind of automated test and then you get this applied skills notation, which is not the same thing as a cert, but it just makes me wonder if there's a little bit of experimenting going on with like how can we change maybe the cert process. I don't know. I'm not saying the cert process will ever change. I have no idea, no insight into that, but I've certainly taken them in my day.
Yep.
And it feels the way you take them, it feels like, oh, you sit at somebody else's computer. I mean, you can do them at home now, I believe, but I actually didn't want to because they put up all these restrictions of like, okay, somebody's going to be watching you or something's going to be watching you, and if you go off camera, you could be, and it's just like, okay, I think I'll just go to the center.
Yeah, I've taken some of those courses remotely that way, like not at a full on testing center, and there's a lot they've got to do to make to kind of make the process repeatably a repeatable experience for everybody, essentially. So I don't envy what they're trying to do there, and it does work. So I think that's the important part. All right, so we're creating Cosmo DB resource. We want to get down to the client bits, which are at the end here. Client integration. So we did get the package, so we've got that part. So on the client part here, so this would be in our API, we could basically say, okay, let's go ahead and do the connection name. Connection project, add Azure Cosmos client extension method to register a connection name parameter. Must match the name used when adding the Cosmo DB resource in the app host. So if we go back to here, I believe that is what we call it. No, I don't want to run as emulator. Thank you very much for trying. I've already got an emulator. So I take that and look at what we did here, right? So we're basically trying to map up these two things we think about from an Aspire perspective, right? Saying, hey, we called it here in Aspire, and we've called it the same thing over here, so they should find each other. All right. Don't have to worry about keyed Cosmo DB client. We're not going to we're not doing multiple instances. Interesting. Oh wow, it's that late. So interesting. So here they're actually doing minimal API specification, bringing in database, which I think we're gonna have to dig in a little bit more on this next time. But this is kind of where we're going. How can we get that? We're using minimal API. We've got a connection out to our essentially adding Cosmo DB client. I think the other thing we need to do just to kind of finish this out would be back here. We've got our Orbital API project. Right, so making sure that we have a reference to that service and the connection string and those kind of things over in the other for the other application as well.
Okay, yeah, we have some things to work on. For one,
we do.
I'm sure we'd have liked to have seen an API actually call out and add some data, but that's okay. And then second is I think we could also add the open API. I guess I would say UI support next time, because that's actually a really interesting topic where I want to say it was .NET 9. I think it is .NET 9 where Swagger came out of the project templates. It does not mean you cannot use Swagger and Swashbuckle and that whole thing. You can, but there are also other,
right?
Yeah, you add it back essentially, or you can start to take a look at some of the other projects out there. And some people, and which again, I have not explored at a high level, but I've certainly watched some people either on stream or on video say, hey, I really love this other project. And if you were watching on Twitch, and I will actually include this in the YouTube link, is Alan was kind enough to link a video from Milan Jovanovic, who I think is, if you aren't following him, so like I said, that's why the link will be in the YouTube notes, is he is absolutely a Microsoft MVP you should be following, puts out a ton of great content on being a developer on this stack. Just, it's fantastic content. He's really insightful. So awesome. Yeah, we'll get that. I'll get that added. But for now, we're a couple minutes past 9. I know we got a little bit of a late start, but but hey, we're getting down the path here. Hopefully, if you've never, hopefully what we're able to do for folks, even though it might be little chunks at a time, is bridge that gap between watching somebody do a presentation where it's all going to go really well for them because it's using the basics, and okay, now I want to use this for real in my application. And that's always where the rubber meets the road of what are the minor differences between your real world situation and what the docs or the Hello World tutorial or the presentation made look so easy, but now it's your turn. Right. And there's always something just a little different of like, hey, okay, yeah, I'm kind of doing that, but we're also doing this other thing. How is that supported? So no, this will be good. All right. So like you said, you had the API getting ready to just return a result, which is not the same, and eventually we'll read it from the database. We'll get some data seeded in there, and we should keep going. I know for sure we will not be on tomorrow. I know that a sore spot for me personally has been that having a regular schedule has been really hard. Both of us have our jobs and careers and mornings and and families and stuff like that. But I know for sure not tomorrow, but I do think we both would like to be on later this week. So
definitely we've got some time that we can kind of do that. I think except for Thursday, that's the only one I can't do. So okay, maybe a Wednesday, maybe a Friday, maybe both.
So I want to thank everybody who joined us in chat, and just really appreciate that you just come in and say hi. I really do. It's really great to know you're here. And probably the most gratifying thing for me has been when we hear what parts of the world people are from, and you realize just how cool that is to be just having a chat with somebody, maybe before bedtime. Hopefully, didn't put you to sleep. But
there you go.
But that's always really cool. So from the East Coast of the United States to you, let's. Oh, it didn't. Interesting. It didn't get rid of the overlay there, but that's all right. I guess that'll do it. And so for Rich Ross, I am Chris Gomez, and we will see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show. Didn't do that. Haha.